All right, Facebook, welcome back. This is Tony Martinez, broker of the Extreme Realty Team group of companies, and you are watching Real Estate Talk Live. And as always, I'm joined by my partner and co-host here. We have Omar Arcia of the Arcia Law Firm. How are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Tony?
I'm excited about being back.
Absolutely. It's a back to school week.
Yeah, man, we took some time off during the summer. What was that?
We had to. You gotta reset the computer. You gotta recharge the capacitor, and then we're back to business now. We're back to the business of letting brokers and agents out there know some of the rights that they have, some of the rights that their clients have, and give them some good tips on how they can become the very best that they can be.
Absolutely. Listen, if you're watching for the first time, welcome. If this is more than the first time, thank you for coming back. So here's what the show is all about. It's kind of unique in the sense that it's geared toward a twofold audience. We are speaking directly to consumers that are thinking or in the process of buying, selling, investing, or renting real estate. We want to give you some tips, some how-tos, some legal advice that can help you avoid some of the pitfalls, save you some money, save you some heartache, and have a successful transaction. We also are here to train and be a service to other real estate professionals because unfortunately the way our industry has evolved or devolved, there's not a whole lot of training or the amount of training that there should be. And our show has become a great resource for agents to go ahead and get that much needed information. So the format is fluid. Okay, that's a good term,
That's a
right?
good term, yeah.
We
we just want people to kind of chime in, give us some questions, give us some feedback on what you see, what you like, what you don't like. If you want us to talk about a particular subject matter that may be important to your transaction or to your business, let us know, and we love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Listen, the reality is most of the questions we get and comments and everything else happen as the show is shared and boosted and everything else. So both Omar and I are constantly monitoring and reviewing. So you can post your questions, comments whenever you want. So sometimes the show will run a half hour, sometimes 45 minutes, sometimes as long as an hour when we have a particular guest. So we just like to do these whenever possible, Wednesdays at noon Eastern time. And it's here through the Extreme Realty Team Facebook page. So a little bit about my company, then Omar can talk real briefly about his company because we try to keep the show as non-commercial as possible so that we can get to a lot of content. As I mentioned, I am the broker of Extreme Realty Team. We have several offices. We have almost 130 agents. We cover a lot of the Florida area. And so part of our mission, part of our goal is to be a resource to consumers and agents that are looking for maybe a place to hang their license and build their careers. So our contact information, both of ours, is going to be coming across the bottom of the screen there from time to time. So you'll be able to just, give us a call, send us a text, visit our website. Omar?
Well, I've had the pleasure of working with Extreme Team for a few months now, and it's been a tremendous opportunity for us and for the folks at Extreme to partner up. But I've been with the law firm, Arcia Law Firm. I've been practicing law for 23 years now, and we primarily focus on real estate law, real estate litigation, transactions, from the simplest residential real estate transaction to a very complex commercial transaction. Again, our number to contact us is on the screen, and we're more than happy to help you. We'll meet with you personally if you need to, with your clients. If there's any issues whatsoever in connection with your real estate transaction, our goal is to try to get you to a closing as opposed to any kind of litigation associated with the transaction itself. Our goal is to get you to closing so that the broker can get their commission and the buyer and seller can go on about their business and move on to the next deal.
Yep. So today we're going to cover two primary areas. Again, being back to school week, one of the things I want to personally touch on is the mindset of a lot of real estate agents that maybe their mind and their time and their focus has been someplace else other than their businesses. And now it's like, okay, the kids are back to school. What do I do? So I just want to give you some ways to get back in the game and make sure that you have the most successful closing of 2017 because, folks, the end of the year is coming up quick.
Yeah, it's before we know it, we're going to be looking at December and Christmas,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden it's New Year's, and that's what happens with all these
Yeah.
transactions. Everything moves very, very quickly.
Yeah, or, the reality is that, I think that the holidays, you tend to have a little bit nicer or more enjoyable holidays when you actually have some money to spend. You ever seen the correlation between those two?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing how that happens. So I want to give you some tips on what are you going to do to make sure that you get some deals done. Okay, let's just call it what it is. You got to get some deals closed so that you go into the holidays and also start the new year off on a very positive note. Now, through Omar and what we call our Ask Our Lawyer segment, the question and focus is on contracts. One of the things I'm very, very concerned about, and if you've watched past shows, we talk extensively about the lack of competency among a lot of real estate professionals when it comes to their knowledge of contracts. And listen, it's kind of like the blind leading the blinder. The consumer knows very little to nothing about the contracts, and they're relying completely on their real estate agent. And just imagine when the real estate agent knows very little to nothing about contracts, what can happen? So one of the things that I've noticed is that maybe this is just something that's happening in society in general, maybe it's just something in our industry, but people are not honoring their contracts anymore. They just are not.
Yep.
And so I don't know what's going on, but maybe they're not being coached properly when they're going into the contract and saying, this is a legal binding agreement you're doing here, and you have to honor it. So what tends to happen is either one party or the other wants to get out of the contract. And you know what? Let me also say this, okay? There are some excellent reasons why someone is entitled to get out of the contract. And then there are issues when someone, just for the lack of a better term, flakes out or defaults on the contract. So let's say you have a scenario where a buyer goes through the inspection process, is not happy with the inspection, chooses to exit out of the contract. If they're within the inspection period, and if it's the as-is contract, they have every right to cancel during that period. That's not so much the issue. The cancellation part is unilateral. They can just send notice saying, we're out. You know where it really gets hung up? Is getting their deposit back. That is what we see our buyers and our sellers struggling with. People that are entitled to that deposit. It could be the buyer entitled to get their deposit back. It could be the seller that's entitled to the deposit because the buyer has defaulted, but the other side will not sign the cancellation release.
Let me just interject real
Yeah.
quickly there and just kind of jump in. And what I see happening most of the time with a deposit is that there's a dispute over who should get a deposit. And most of the time, if it's done properly, that issue should be a non-issue. The deposit should be turned over immediately if there's a cancellation within the due diligence period or there's a cancellation within the financing period. That deposit should be returned immediately. But what I see happening is a lot of realtors who don't understand the concept of these contracts and what the deadlines are, is that they actually will do a power play so that their client can keep the deposit, which is outrageous to me. I mean, the bottom line is if the deposit is in there, if the buyer is entitled to that deposit back and they're canceling within the right time, there should be no question whatsoever. And so then the issue then becomes is, what do we do now? I mean, you have these buyers and sellers that are doing the power play. They're relying on professionals that are basically clashing with each other. What do we do now? So we're going to talk about that mediation and the arbitration provision and litigation and when to consider those types of scenarios.
Right, and we have a situation right now within our own office where a closing didn't happen because the seller basically defaulted. The seller did not inform anybody that they were leaving to a foreign country. For whatever reasons, they could not get to the consulate to go ahead and sign the papers. Long story short, they missed the first closing time, an extension was granted. They missed the second one. And what we are furious about right now is that their agent, the listing agent, is doing everything to obstruct the process that you can imagine. And so what I caution you agents when you're doing this is this agent that we're talking about now, and of course I'm not naming any names, but we are absolutely going to file an ethics complaint against that agent with the local board and with the state, because these are not the agents we need. The agent knows clearly that the buyer is entitled to their deposit back,
Yep.
and is throwing everything in the mix to try to go ahead and cloud it. So what rights does our buyer have right now? In this case, it's a $2,500 deposit. What can our buyer
We've
do?
talked about this before, right? We talked about agents not doing what's ethically correct, not acting like professionals, and acting basically like a hired gun
Yeah.
for their clients. And that's not what being a professional real estate agent is all about. Being a professional real estate agent means you got to go back to your client and say, hey, you had to close, you didn't close, you need to sign this termination agreement so that this deal goes away, and you can sell it to whomever you want. But if that doesn't happen, then under the FAR/BAR contract, you give notice by way of the real estate agent that you want to conduct a mediation to
Okay.
get your deposit back. If they're not willing to give it back to you, we have 30 days to get that deposit back through a mediation process. We'll talk a little bit more about what the mediation is all about. And then if that mediation process does not work out, then your buyer has a right to initiate litigation in small claims court to get that deposit back. Now, a buyer may say, well, it's $2,500. It's going to cost me like $3,000 or $4,000 to get that $2,500 back. But this seller needs to understand that he's going to be responsible for any attorney's fees associated with that transaction. And once I get a judgment against that seller, I can tie up any future sale of the property by leaning up that property with a final judgment.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. So the buyer.
That was a lot. I just threw like 20 years worth of collection experience in there.
Well, I mean, so the buyer basically says, okay, listen, I'm not going to just, stand still for this. I'm going after the money.
Right.
So we should notify this agent and seller.
Step one.
Step one is
notify the seller and the agents for the seller that you want a mediation.
as per the as-is agreement.
Right. To get your security deposit back.
Okay, and how do you initiate that mediation process? It's
Well,
initiated by the buyer side,
Right. It's
hiring an
initiated-
attorney?
It's initiated by the party that's seeking the mediation. No, you don't need to hire an attorney.
Okay.
I mean, there's more board certified mediators in the state of Florida than just about any other state. So, I mean, you can go online and find a mediator. That's not a big deal. I mean, a mediator will run you anywhere from about $250 to $300
Okay.
an hour, which is split between the parties. So finding a mediator is not the problem. Getting the other side to mediate is the problem. And because this is a voluntary process that you're doing pursuant to the agreement, you notify the other side, you want a mediation to resolve the security deposit issue. Chances are when you have a situation where the other side is not being responsive, they're just going to ignore your demand, right? So step two would be after those 30 days expire for the mediation is you need to file a lawsuit to recover your security deposit.
Okay, so the notice is saying we want to initiate mediation action. So the buyer should have already contacted the mediator prior to notifying the other side.
You can do it,
You
that,
can
way, right? You can
Yeah.
do it that way. Contact a mediator, and the mediator will give you some dates that they're available. If the buyer feels like this is something they don't want to mess with because they don't want to screw up, which is why I also recommend hiring an attorney for this process. Why? Because even if you get the mediator and you do it what's called pro se on your own, what if everything goes a little bit sour and the other side's not responding to your request? Then you need a little bit of attorney firepower on your side. And a lot of attorneys are willing to take these cases, like I said, because you're going to get paid your attorney's fees at the end. If you get a final judgment for the amount of, not only the amount of the security deposit, but also your attorney's fees, like I said, you can tie up that property with that final judgment through a lien.
So let's say the mediation works in favor of our buyer and the others, because mediation is not binding, okay, the seller opts to still not, at that point, it's time to then file a legal action with the courts. And I'm not even sure what, because you mentioned small claims. So is that $5,000, $7,500?
Right, you have
or?
two levels of small claims. There's a $5,000 level and then $5,000 to $15,000. If if the security deposit is in excess of $15,000, then you're doing it in your regular court, what's called circuit court.
Okay.
But if it's under 15,000 and it's considered small claims, and that's what, and it moves very quick because the small claims matter. You immediately get a trial date, pre-trial conference. You know, you're looking at a final judgment within 30 to 45 days.
And how influential is the fact that the mediation went in favor of the buyer going into the small claims? Is the judge in that scenario looking at the results of the mediation and factoring that into their decision, or is it start all over again as everybody presents their case?
That's a really common misconception about mediation. Mediation, as they say, is even better than Vegas. What happens in mediation stays in mediation. It's 100% confidential. So anything that was discussed, any outcome of mediation cannot be discussed, and a judge gets an instant case of amnesia when a mediator gets an instant case of amnesia when we discuss mediation, because no one wants to hear about it. They just basically cover their ears. And the reason why is because we want parties during the mediation process to openly discuss any kind of settlement options, and it won't be held against them.
Okay. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because you have in the past, when I put my little lawyer hat on, in cases where mediation leads to arbitration, such as a listing, arbitration is binding.
Yeah, arbitration is binding upon the parties.
And when the person does not abide by the arbitration, that can be used in the court as well.
Right.
Okay.
If there's a final judgment by an arbitrator in the arbitration, the other side doesn't abide by it, then you file a motion to enforce the arbitration award in circuit court. And now that's enforced by a judge. And now you can actually tie up the property with that. But arbitration is a little more expensive than mediation. It's a little more lengthy. They do have a residential foreclosure and residential real estate arbitration division that is actually less costly than your standard arbitration, which can be very, very expensive. That's something that I would definitely ask clients to contact me about. We do a lot of arbitrations. And we usually get some very, very good results in those because most of the time they're not even challenged.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. So just for clarification purposes, we've been talking about a scenario where it's the as-is contract, and the as-is contract does state that mediation must be attempted, but arbitration does not factor in. So arbitration is not a factor in the as-is agreement.
Right, that's correct. That we're talking that the CRISP agreement does envision an arbitration provision that allows parties to go to arbitration if necessary. But in the standard FAR/BAR contract, the as-is, it's 30 days for mediation, and if mediation doesn't work out, then you go to litigation.
For consumers out there, just understand that the vast majority of escrow deposits are held by a neutral third party. They're held by a title company or, say, an attorney. So you may be 100% within your rights to get that money back, but that company will not release those funds without having a signed cancellation and release from both parties.
Or a court order.
Or a court order, which leads to scenarios where the title company has had to file interpleader action with the courts to get a resolution, right?
Right. I've got cases that have been sitting around where my client was the seller. The buyer was completely in violation of the contract. We have like $30,000 that's being held by New World in a case, and the buyer is not doing anything. So, and New World's saying, hey, if you're not going to do anything, I'm not going to spend money doing interpleader action. It's your money. Go, do whatever you need to do under the contract. And it's just been sitting there. And of course, my seller doesn't care. He's already moved on, sold the property, and if that comes around, then he'll certainly defend it. But for now, it's just sitting there, and that happens a lot. So it's very important that whether you're on the seller side or on the buyer side, I think it's important that you at least meet with an attorney to figure out what those rights are. And we definitely meet with a lot of folks to discuss their options when it comes to either security deposit issue or specific performance issues. That means that it's forcing one party to go through with the contract against their will, if you will, by court order.
To honor the agreement. So also understand something, because I know the emotions are like rampant in that scenario. When in cases of the interpleader action, there's costs. I mean, significant costs associated with it. It can cost upwards of $1,500 to launch this action Well, the title company is just going to grab that money right from the deposit itself. And if you started with a $2,000 deposit of $2,500, what's left? So try to work it out. And you know what? Here's something, and it may leave a little bad taste in your mouth, but let's say you're someone that's entitled to having all 10,000, okay? It might make more sense to just take a little bit less and get the money.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those scenarios where I know I'm entitled to all 10,000, but give me 8 and I'll let it go.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many of these cases involving a security deposit I've been to mediation, and either side walks away kind of upset. But that's the sign of a good mediation, right? Either side's got to walk away a little bit, thinking one side got a little bit less than they thought they were going to get, and one side paid a little bit more than they thought they were going to pay. That's what a good mediation, a good settlement is all about. If you walk away and you get everything you were looking for, then that's called going to a final judgment. That's not necessarily a mediation or a settlement of any kind.
Sometimes you just do things, in a joke within my family, you do it for the principality of the matter, And let's say you're entitled to 100% of the money. Listen, you're in the blessed position, you were able to move forward with your life and that transaction even without that money. That's a scenario where you say, I don't care if it takes 3 months or it takes a year.
Yeah.
You know what? I know I'm 100% entitled to that money. I'm going to win this case. My court fees, while no guarantees, are going to end up being paid if you win. And those are people that will go all the way through with it, because unfortunately, we do see in our legal system all too often people have to compromise their principles because of for the purposes of expediency.
I always tell clients litigating or hiring an attorney to litigate on principle can be probably one of the most expensive propositions you could ever undergo, because no matter how good the law is on your side or not on your side, if your principal tells you, I want to continue litigating, you're just going to continue litigating and burning up attorney's fees until you get that final result. And unfortunately, it can be very, very expensive once you get to that final result.
Absolutely. Well, folks, you're watching Real Estate Talk Live. It's an intense one today because we're talking about contracts. But if you like what you hear and what you see, it's just a sampling of the kind of content we bring you week after week and what we bring as professionals to any real estate transaction. This show, we got to give props to our sponsor. You mentioned them briefly, New World Title. If not for New World, this show would not be possible. And I cannot think of a better title company you as a real estate consumer, you as a real estate professional can work with. 15 offices throughout Florida. We're blessed to have them right here in New World of Davie within our Davie office. So give them an opportunity to earn your business, and you will love the service and responsiveness that you receive from New World Title.
Absolutely. I've dealt with many title companies over the last 23 years that I've been practicing, and New World Title far and away is the most professional, most responsive, hires the most responsible and professional processors in the market, and also just the environment that your clients are going to go to when you do a closing is totally different. I mean, I've been to some title companies, places where I wouldn't go in with a shotgun. And I still do the closing, but you've got some of these offices that people walk in there and they feel very comfortable, very at ease. And listen, doing a closing is stressful enough as it is. You need to have a place where you feel comfortable and you feel like everything has been done and everything is proper. And that's what a closing should be. It shouldn't be a mad rush in an office where everything looks like it's chaotic and there's boxes everywhere. I mean, I've been there.
I know.
It's not a fun situation, not at all.
So how about this? How about if I give you a couple tips to maybe avoid the whole issue with the deposit, or to the extent of a disputed deposit? One of the things that I see a lot of real estate agents not using or utilizing is a strategy to put an initial deposit and then a second additional deposit in the transaction. I think the mindset is, let's go all in at the very beginning. Well, here's the problem. Let's say what it takes to get this deal is $10,000. That's what the seller wants as a good faith deposit. Well, you can structure it so all 10,000 goes, let's say, within 3 days. But when things go wrong, they tend to go wrong many times at the very beginning, right around the inspection.
Right.
Okay, so one of the advice I would give you is, how about splitting it into two? How about splitting it into two? How about putting an initial deposit? The initial deposit might be $2,000, might be $3,000, with the second deposit being due 10, 12, 15 days after. So if you put it 10 days after and the inspection period is 7 days, now you have plenty of time to see if there's issues with the property
you get
that
that
cannot be
7 day
resolved.
period. Yeah, you get that 7 day
Yeah.
period to make sure this is a deal you want to go into, and you may not even have to post up that first security deposit if you discover right out of the gate that this is just not a property you want to invest in. I mean, how many times have we seen a property that looks beautiful in the outside, and on the inside, once you see what's going on, you realize this is not something that I want to put any money down on.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to make sure, because sometimes there are a lot of newer agents that are listening and not quite following to the letter what we're saying, is that, you know, if you put $3,000 up front with the other $10,000, the other $7,000 due, say in 10 days, and during the inspection period, the buyer says, I'm out, well, you might just get a fast cancellation and release with no issues whatsoever for those $3,000. But if there is an issue, you've only put $3,000 of that buyer's money at risk as opposed to the entire $10,000.
That's correct.
The other strategy, seldom ever used by real estate professionals, is just do the inspection in the first day or two. Our contracts by default call for the initial deposit to be placed within 3 days, 3 calendar days, if you don't make any changes to it whatsoever. What prevents you from doing the inspection the very next day, or say the second day? If the results are not favorable, if for whatever reason the buyer wants to get out, they can send a unilateral cancellation.
Yep.
And then whether the other side signs or not, there is no deposit at risk, because the deposit was not even due until the third day.
That's right, and I think that, you know, once we get into that situation where you're being more proactive about the issue of deposit, then you're really going to be saving your client a lot of time, energy, and stress. If there's later a security deposit issue that you're going to have to go to mediation or you're going to have to go to litigation about, you want to stay away from that. You want to stay away from those extra costs.
Yeah, I don't even like my agents ever, did I ever say ever? Ever putting deposit a company's offer. That's old school. Man, that's how it was in the 70s and 80s. Show me a copy of the check. Show me a check. Forget that nonsense. Put that as going to be due in 3 days. You know why? If you put a company's, it must accompany it. If it's accepted, the money must now be deposited.
Right.
Now that it's deposited with escrow, then it belongs to neither party. It's in limbo right there. So I always educate the agents. Use the fact that 99% of sellers are going to be okay with the deposit being put within those 3 days. Don't ante up that money necessarily on the first day or the second. You have until the third day, and do your inspection within that period of time.
Right, and then I guess the other option would be if you put down that first deposit before the second deposit happens, and you've got that a full inspection period, then make sure you utilize every single day of that inspection period to conduct whatever inspections you may have. And if necessary, if you need to cancel for whatever reason, do it within that inspection period so you don't have to post up that second deposit.
Agreed. Another issue that came up this week, and it's amazing. I mean, just to me, there are agents that have been in this business for years and years and years and years, and still do not know what they're talking about. We have a scenario where one of our buyers, the property did not appraise.
Right.
It is a financing deal. The property did not appraise, $15,000 below the agreed sale price. Okay, buyer says, you know what, if the seller's willing to work with me, we'll strike up an agreement, go on. Seller's not willing to budge. You know what, that's the seller's prerogative. The seller says, nope, I'm not willing to take a dime less than what we agreed. Okay, pursuant to the contract, the buyer says, I am getting out of this contract because it did not appraise. You know what the listing agent told us? No, this doesn't have an appraisal contingency.
Right, and to a certain extent, you know, they're right literally. You know, there's no appraisal contingency in your FAR/BAR as is contract. but the appraisal contingency is built in to the financing contingency.
Right.
And if they cancel within the financing contingency period because of the fact that it did not appraise, then that falls into the financing contingency, and they're well within their right to do a unilateral cancellation and recover the security deposit. Again, this is one of those situations where you have the realtor for the listing agent trying to play hardball,
Right.
Okay, be a hired gun for their client instead of maybe even consulting with someone that's an attorney. And I think she told us she was even in the mortgage industry.
Business.
I'm
Yeah.
in the mortgage industry, so I know that there's no financing, there's no appraisal
appraisal
contingency.
contingency.
There's no appraisal contingency in the contract, but the appraisal contingency is built into the financing contingency, and they're well within their rights to cancel.
So then it begs the question. In this case, it was a conventional financing. Had it been FHA or VA, we would have had the addendum accompanying it that says the property must appraise. So that would have been a non-issue. But it begs the question on conventional loans. Is it redundant or is it prudent to go ahead and include an appraisal contingency on financing deals?
Well, I mean, like I said, it's included in the financing contingency.
I've always thought this redundant.
But I think that if I feel like if you have this concern
Right.
that the property may not appraise going in, right? And I know there's certain circumstances like
yeah.
that. You have a situation where your buyer is probably offering way too much money for that property,
Yeah.
and you're thinking in the back of your mind, man, this is $30,000-$40,000 above market. There's no way that this thing is going to appraise.
Right.
And going in, so you would only be doing a benefit to your client to just make the implied express, if you will.
Right.
So maybe just put it in the addendum. But I wouldn't say it in every transaction.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe kind of if you have transactions where there's a red flag because your buyer just wants this property and is offering way above market, then I would consider doing it there so that there's no issue coming out of the contract.
Agreed. And then, of course, if it's a cash deal and you're getting a spectacular price on the property, you're not going to include an appraisal contingency. But if there's any question whether you are overpaying for the property, the appraisal contingency is a must or recommended in those scenarios to protect. More and more sellers, because sellers are getting savvier, they're telling the buyers, they're telling the agents representing the buyers that there will be no appraisal contingency at all in the transaction, and that the buyer must be able to bring any difference to closing. We're having that mad rush to buy real estate, just like we did in 2006 and 7,
Yeah.
that led to the whole nightmare that we had before. So more and more sellers are saying, no, because you know what? We have to see both sides. The strategy on the part of the buyer is offer whatever they want. If it doesn't appraise, we then have the leverage.
Sure.
The sellers are saying, I know what you're doing, okay? So I want to protect us, and I want no appraisal contingency. So this is where agents earn their money. Scenarios like that, you have to have a buyer that does have enough disposable income or savings that they could bring another $5,000, $10,000 to closing. Piece of advice. If this is the direction you're going on that transaction, you can cap the amount that the buyer has to agree to put in over and above. So let's say you agree on $350,000 and the property may not appraise. If you just leave it open like that and it appraises $20,000 less, the buyer has agreed to bring $20,000 to closing.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially on a cash deal, you want to make sure that as a realtor, as an agent, that you're taking into consideration the specifics of that particular transaction. Let's not get into the cookie cutter mind frame that we got into in 2005 to 2007, where people were just submitting wild offers and then backing out, and it was crazy. It was the Wild West. Let's not get into that mind frame again and think through the transaction that you're putting your client into so that you don't later regret
Sure.
that suggestion.
Right. So just to kind of sum that up, if I were me representing the buyer and the seller's telling me, no, we want the appraisal contingency waived, I would say, I'll tell you what if the buyer agrees should the property not appraise, to cover up to X amount.
Right, that's
You
a
know,
good
and
middle of the
that
road
middle of the
agreement.
road kind of scenario, right? Because I think a typical buyer, if it's 1,000 or two over and above, they're thinking long term. This is the home I want to grow old in, raise a family in, whatever. That becomes pennies per day when it's all said and done. But you have to protect them should it come in at a number that they simply don't have.
Of course.
Because obviously if they don't have the money, they can't go through with the purchase, but now they're putting their initial deposit at risk.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I just want to make sure that people know how to get a hold of us if they need to ask
Sure.
any additional questions regarding those specific circumstances or any legal matter that you may have to ask us questions about. I mean, the number to get a hold of Extreme is going to be on the screen.
Yep.
And they can certainly contact Extreme anytime. I'm seeing a lot of new agents
Yeah.
coming on board at Extreme from the big boys.
Yeah.
Right? They're just realizing, wait a second, this is, I'm a little tired of the big firm mentality. I want that extreme personal care, that personal attention that we get as agents, where we have someone that can actually answer the phone when we call our broker.
Imagine that.
We have a broker that's actually giving us some good advice on how we can proceed, and we have counsel if the broker doesn't really understand what issues are involved or can't answer the questions because they're more legal oriented. All they got to do is pick up the phone and call our CL law firm, and they're on speed dial with a real estate professional that can not only provide them guidance, but then also a real estate lawyer that can add additional benefits to their clients. So it's imperative not only for people who are considering a purchase or sale transaction to call Extreme, but also for those agents out there that are kind of fed up where they're at right now, to come over and experience the extreme difference, right? How was that for a plug for your company, man?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. No, we are so blessed. We're an independent firm. We've been doing this for a few years now, and you have to put in your sweat equity and you have to put in your dues. And we've always been new agent friendly. I mean, we have just always been a place where new agents could come and get the training and nurturing. But it's so gratifying to see experienced producing agents now realizing, wait a minute, there's something about that culture. There's something about that brand. I love the name. You know, I'm partial, but I love the name. Because how often can your name reflect your feeling? How you feeling today? I'm feeling extreme. How'd you do today? I did extreme. You can't do that with a lot of names out there. I'm not going to mention them. They know who they are, right? So we definitely want to sit down with as many real estate professionals that are seeking alternatives. While on the subject of real estate professionals, you know, the whole back to school week got me thinking, you know what? A lot of agents are going back to work. You know, one of the jokes is not necessarily a flattering joke, but I borrow something from Winston Churchill where I put, never have so many that have earned so little taken so much time off. Because this industry, I'm telling you, this industry is a trip. And I can understand when a multi-million-dollar producer that says, you know what, I need some time off. But it always kind of makes me chuckle and cry myself to sleep at night sometimes when I see so many agents that are not making the money that they should be or need to make. And it's summertime and I'm like, I'm gone.
I'm taking off, I'm going on vacation.
That's it. And so what happens now is the kids have gone back to school, and there may be that feeling right now as agents kind of sit down and they're hearing crickets and they're going, what am I going to do now?
Didn't do anything for the last couple of months in
So there's
generating
nothing-
new leads.
so there's nothing in the
following new
pipeline.
leads. So there's nothing in the pipeline for the last quarter of the year.
Scary thought. And you know what? Unfortunately, for as good and bad, our industry's got a lot of people licensed that aren't really working the business. But if you're one of the ones that says, no, listen, this is my why. I got to make this happen. I just want to give you a little piece of advice, okay? Number one is, if you haven't done what you wanted to do or needed to do up until now, let it go. Get over it, because you cannot change the past. It's done. You can kick yourself all you want, but look, it's not going to accomplish anything.
Right.
You can't turn back the clock. All you can do is maybe reset it. All right, so here you are, we're in the tail end of August. What are you gonna do? Well, start with a goal. I'll give you an example. When I sit down and do coaching for agents, I have agents who come to me and I'll say, okay, what do you wanna make? And it's a nice round figure. Everybody, for some reason, likes 100,000. I don't know, like that's big money or something, right? Right? So, they say, I want to make 100,000. I says, okay, let me ask you something. You're brand new. You don't have any sales experience, any marketing experience, any business experience, and you have no marketing budget, but you want to make 100,000. How about we do this? How about you tell me, what is it going to take for you to be free? And they'll tell me, what do you mean? Well, you have a full-time job right now, yes. What would you need to earn between now and the end of the year for you to have both the income and the reserves needed to turn this into your full-time occupation? That number becomes a lot less. I go, use that number. And call that number 30,000. So let's say right now, we're at the tail end of August. If you could just make 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 between now and the end of the year, it would pump you up. You would have a great closing to the year. You would have a great holiday, and you'd be excited about going into the new year.
It's always important to have a goal in mind.
Yeah, but make it realistic.
A realistic goal.
Yeah, it's got to be achievable. So take that number. Now, here's what I want you to do, because I can't do it here, but I want you to work backwards. Because ultimately, here's how you get to that number. Call that number 20,000. You get to that number based on closings. So you need to know, on average, how much you make per closing. You know how you determine that? What is the average sale price in your market? What is your average sale price of deals that you've done? And what is the commission split that you're on with your broker? And that's basically going to tell you how much you net on any given deal. So for example, if that deal, you typically net 5,000, okay? And I'm not a math whiz, but if I need to make 20 grand, and I typically would net 5, how many deals do I have to close?
Well, I'm not a math whiz either.
I'm going 4.
I'm thinking 4. I'm thinking 4 deals will do it.
Whew. Notice how I structured that question so even I could answer it. Now, to close 4 deals, you might have to put 5 contracts in place. You know why? Some of them don't close. You may have to put 6 contracts in. You know why? Some of them don't close. So notice I'm working backwards. 4 closings or 4 sides, because if you get both sides of the transaction, it's like double, but 4 sides equals 6 contracts. Well, how many prospects do you need to get to the point where 6 commit to a deal? Well, maybe 50%. Maybe I have to be working with at least 12 people right now, active buyers or sellers, to get to the point where I get to 6 contracts. Am I explaining it so far good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, this is real basic. This is basic information regarding how you generate new sales, how you keep new. But I mean, a lot of people, when they're coming out of that summer,
yeah,
you know what happens is you're in a situation where you didn't really work your leads during the summer, and you're coming out and you're like in a frantic daze.
Right.
You don't know where to even start. So this is so good for some of these folks that are coming out of summer, because it just kind of gives them a very basic, simple structure where to kind of restart their business model.
Yeah, but going beyond that, if you go to a typical person and you say, I want to make 20,000, that number can seem unachievable. Okay, I want to make 100,000. That number can seem unachievable. But if you work it backwards and you break it down to the ridiculous, see, that's what I'm trying to do. I've gone from 20,000 and I've turned it into a number called 4 deals, 4 closings, which then goes backward to 6 contracts, 5 or 6 contracts, which works backwards to say 12 or so prospects. Now I got one more level to go back. I got to go back to leads. How many active leads do I have to be working or generating that I can get to the point from all those tire kickers, I can get it down to 12 really good prospects that I can get to 6 contracts that I can get to 4 closings. And if you take that total number of leads and you divide it by the number of days you're planning on working between now and the end of the year, you have a number that is not overwhelming and a number that's achievable.
Yeah, it's a fixed number. It's a realistic fixed number that you can shoot for every day. Every day when you wake up, you know you need to hit this many leads, you need to hit this many prospects so that you can achieve at least as close as possible to that goal that you set for yourself at the end of the year.
Sure.
It's very, very straightforward, and it requires, obviously it requires some projection, and it requires some organization, but at least it gets you out of that frantic daze of not knowing where to start. Sit down today and put some numbers on a sheet of paper and say to yourself, this is what I want to achieve, and this is what it takes to achieve it. And then put it up in front of you where you see it every day. Make 2 or 3 copies. Put it in your bathroom mirror so you can see it every day. And every day you're shooting for that goal, and every day you've structured in your mind, that's what I need to do to achieve what I need to do for my family before the end of this year.
Agreed. Now, when you hit that final number, if that number is between 1 and 3 leads per day, that's doable. Now you got to sit down, look at your budget, look at your business, sit down with your broker and say, listen, how do I get 1 to 3 leads a day? All right, let's talk. Are you able to buy Zillow leads? Are you able to buy Realtor.com leads? Are you going to call for sale by owners? Are you going to call expireds? Are you going to do open houses? All of these things. If that number is 5 to 7 leads per day, you probably have an unrealistic goal. So more on this in future shows. Right. I just wanted to let people know that you have to work with what you have. Set up a goal between now and the end of the year and get back on track. Last and not least in there, get back into the swing of things by looking at your inventory. If you've been out of real estate for a while now, a great place to start is become familiar with the product you sell. And start with the neighborhood that you live in. It's pretty embarrassing when you don't even know what the inventory is like in your own subdivision. So start working circles and work further and further out. And within a day or two of practicing real estate activities, you start developing the muscle memory will take over. And maybe the muscle memory was never there because you haven't really given it your all. But these are just some simple key tips to kind of get going.
Yeah, and I was just also going to say, I mean, these are the kind of tips and information and guidance you're going to get as an agent of Extreme. I mean, this is not something that Tony is kind of pulling out of his back pocket and just throwing it your way. I mean, this is what he preaches to his agents time and time again, and he structures it in a way where the agents can digest each one of these concepts so that they can maximize their potential. And it's really awesome to see and refreshing to see a broker come out like that and give that kind of guidance to their agents, because it's just not what happens out in the marketplace right now.
It's becoming less and less common, which is great for us because we're filling that niche.
Yeah.
All right, folks, listen, we're winding down now. We've always felt very honored and privileged to have this opportunity to go ahead and impart this information to you. Hopefully you see value in it. You can let us know that you do see value in it. You can express your gratitude by sharing this information with other folks that you know. Some of our shows are getting upwards of 10,000 views now. We'd like to see that continue to climb. So again, we'll keep this show going so long as we're getting that support and feedback coming from you. So as again, I thank you very much for your participation. And when are we coming back? Next week, right?
We're going to come back next week. I mean, I feel like we've come back. It's back to school. It's back to business for Real Estate Talk Live. I'm feeling pumped. I'm feeling excited. The show was all about getting people back and pumped to become successful real estate professionals again. But again, I mean, we can't do it without you guys giving us and feeding us all the information that you want us to talk about. I mean, we can sit up here and talk all day regarding all kinds of interesting topics for us, but we want to know what's interesting for you. Talk to us about what you want us to answer, what you want us to address. I'm sure there's unique circumstances in your deals that you want to talk to us about. And obviously, if you have particular circumstances that require legal expertise, we encourage you to contact us. Contact us on our telephone number, which is on the screen right now. Also contact us via our web page, which is also on the screen right now, arcialawfirm.com, and we'll set up an appointment where we meet face to face with you or with your client to identify any issues that we may have to address and do it in the most efficient and cost-effective way possible.
Awesome. All right, folks, thanks again. We'll catch you next Wednesday at noon Eastern Time. Take care.